Welcome, everyone, to our So Powerful Spring Summit. I'm here with our special keynote speaker, Honorable Princess Kasune Zulu. Hello, friend. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jason?
Very, very good. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of the summit. It's really an honor.
Oh, thank you for having me. I know we have known each other for so many years, since 2002, and here we are. Almost
20.
20 years? Yes. So that explains a lot of friendship and a lot of partnership, and it's exciting to see what God continues to do in our lives.
Amen. Well, let me formally introduce you, and then we'd love to have you begin to share. I'm going to ask you some questions and just sort of interview you for this conversation. So, with a formal introduction, Honorable Princess Kasune Zulu is the Fountain of Life, FOLA Ministry, and Member of Parliament in Zambia. She's also a renowned HIV/AIDS advocate and the author of a wonderful book, Warrior Princess, an autobiography that tells her story. Now, she became an advocate for HIV/AIDS issues many years ago, and that's really what started, in many ways, her journey towards really being a renowned worldwide speaker for issues related to HIV/AIDS and serving the poor. So, Princess, thank you again for joining us. Would you just take a moment and share with us a little bit about your journey as it relates to uh, your beginning in advocacy work and what really prompted you to want to speak out on behalf of HIV/AIDS issues and people in your community?
Thank you, Jason. As I alluded to in some ways, I was born in 1976, so I'm now 45 years. It all started really in 1997 when I really felt compelled that I wanted to know about my HIV status. Because at that time, there were beginning to be cases of people living with HIV, not really living, but dying of AIDS. That is the proper way to put it. And I really got convinced that I wanted to know my own status as well. And it was really at a time when a lot of people didn't want to know, or some people are being laughed at. There was excuses given that it was witchcraft. So it was a very different time. But I really felt convinced that somehow I wanted to know my own HIV status without even knowing that I'll end up being found to be HIV positive. So when I found out I was HIV positive, I really felt like God was saying to me, I want to use your voice to help others. Now, this is in 1998. I tested both of my children then who were HIV negative. And upon my own diagnosis that I was HIV positive, I really felt like there was an audible voice that was saying, say, praise God. And I said it in my heart, but I didn't say it loud. But I left that hospital feeling I needed to talk about this. And I started right there and then. So for me, it was that instant moment where I felt the calling of God. And I thought this was my destiny, even though I was told I'll only live for 6 months. And for me, I thought, why not use the 6 months to make a difference
Wow.
than to live 6 months out of regret of what had happened. And that's how I literally began in a small town called Luansha, knowing too well that I would die in 6 months. And so for me, though I would have never known what it means to leave a legacy, I think that's what it was all about. I thought, well, I'm going to die in 6 months. Time is running out. So what difference can I make for someone else? And
Wow.
that is what propelled me. It is what pushed me to say, if I only have 6 months to live, I want to help someone else not to become infected by telling them the dangers of HIV and how it's transmitted. But I also wanted to encourage someone else who was already HIV positive to tell them that you can live long with HIV, especially if your faith in God is all that you have. And it is a time where we didn't have any treatment. But I
Right.
also believe that if I was to die, I would rather die in the Lord. So those were the three determining factors.
Wow. So then your journey advanced from there, where a radio program came about where you were publicly talking about the issues on national airwaves. How did the journey towards being a broadcast, radio personality occur? What took you from that moment of decision in the hospital and that moment of God calling to where you actually began to have a platform where you were speaking to larger numbers of people?
Yeah, so when I committed to say I wanted to talk about HIV to my people, for me, I thought I would touch one life. I would touch few people because I was racing against time. 6 months is not a long time in the scheme of things, but somehow God gave me this outlook on life. It was less of myself or my family. It was more of what difference can I make? And it was that outlook that led me to hitchhike, unconventional as it is, but that's what happened. I had to hitchhike with the truck drivers because we were living on a copper belt, and the copper belt has different towns in different directions. And so I would make a triangle, literally, get on one track, and all I wanted to do was to warn them against HIV and AIDS. And then I'll make the triangle back. So I would cover about 3 towns. It was very unconventional. Uh, for lack of a better word, unwise now that I'm 45 years.
Crazy. That's amazing.
But it was a
Wow.
crazy thought. I was racing against time and I
Yeah.
wanted to make all the difference. And
Wow.
so for me, especially at that time, it was known that truck drivers were the one transmitting the virus.
Right.
And Zambia being a landlocked country. So there was logic in my thinking,
Yeah.
yet risky. And I went out of my way to do that. I would even pretend to be a commercial sex worker. So I would dress
Wow.
very provocative just so that they could pick me up and then I could tell them the message. And I would have my HIV test actually in my hand.
Wow.
And a lot of them never believed it. Some really repented, if I may use that word, and say, wow, I would not be as keen to see other women on the way. But it was during that same time that I was also now beginning to go into companies so that I could tell them about these dangers. And this one day, I was coming from a very well-known um, utility company. And part of my logic was this utility company makes more money than the ordinary Zambia in Indola. I want to talk to them because they are an easy target, I'm sure. And if this is how HIV is transmitted, I want to talk to them. But fast forward to the conversation, I was denied access because they asked me, are you a doctor? I said, no. Are you a nurse? I said, no. Are you a counselor? I said, no. Then they were like, well, we can't have you come. I went to about 3 companies. But lo and behold, as I was going back now, I said, I'll get on another track to get to the town where I was staying. But even if it's not a track, it's a bus, I'll get on. Because at that time, my late husband did not even know I was doing these things. So there was a lot of risk involved. And in the end, when he discovered, literally, he warned me of divorce and be sent to the village. But I had this age. I guess that's what callings will do to you.
Yeah.
It becomes a passion that you cannot explain. It becomes a drive that if you don't do it, you feel like I'm going to die,
Yeah.
literally. And a lot of people who came to know about it, like, why are you risking your life? Why are you risking your marriage? Why are you putting yourself to be a laughing stock? I said, I cannot explain it, but this is what I feel. And that's how I met a man by the name of late Dr. Manasseh Piri, who ended up actually introducing me to a radio station. And out of that, I was willing to go on that radio station. Against all odds, my husband then said, when you come back, I'll chase you, go to the village. I didn't have any education. So the threats were real. And I was going to lose custody of my children. But still, against all that, I was committed to go to that radio station.
Wow.
And when I did that radio station, people called in and they said, we want her to have our own radio show. That is how I went from just doing things with the truck drivers going into churches wherever they could accept me, to now
Man.
being held on the national level, and to being sponsored by UNICEF, and producing now the radio show in about 7 other languages, and winning the award for the best broadcaster. So that is how it was.
I have like 50 questions from that period of your life because that is
Yeah.
just remarkable. I honestly didn't remember any of the AIDS highway truck driver
Mhm.
work and story. Goodness, that must have been incredibly scary. Do you remember the moment you first did that? You first got in a truck with someone and said, like, what did you say to him? Like, sorry, pal, I'm not going to be helping out today in any way, shape, or form. You will be repenting, and I'm, going to tell you all about AIDS. What did you say? Like,
Yeah, so first of all, to put it in context, it wasn't much unheard of to hitchhike, because at that time
yeah,
in Zambia,
okay,
Zambia didn't have much transportation.
okay,
Okay. And me, who liked to go to the village from the town where I used to live,
yeah,
it was easy that from the village to the next bigger town, you had to stop whatever vehicle stopped.
okay,
And the truck drivers usually were the more transient people.
yeah.
So I think I must have gotten on a truck at
Oh,
some point. Okay. However, this one was different because I was on a mission,
yeah,
and I knew that the impression I was giving is that I was going to be their client.
yeah,
And to then flip the conversation, I don't remember whether that's the first conversation I had, or it was just one of those where this man was like almost having an accident. I talk about it in my autobiography, Warrior Princess, where he was trying to connect what I had told him,
yeah.
plus the way I was looking and what he was hearing. Literally, we could have crashed. And
Wow.
he was very, very sober about it, and appreciative. But others just laughed it off, or
Yeah.
thought I was just making it up. And like, it's like, where is this HIV in today's world? It's like the way people are saying, where is this COVID? You
Uh-huh.
know,
Uh-huh.
in fact, it was very similar for some people, like, oh, well, I don't care. But I think to some, it was a timely message. For
Yeah.
some, as always, there were people who like that disease does not exist. And to
Yeah.
look back and see that what I was doing at an individual level was being done by programs like World Vision. I came to learn they had a cross-border initiative. Not that they would hitchhike in the tracks, but they had peer educators in all border areas who are talking about HIV.
Yeah.
So it's like I was having this, I don't know how to call it, maybe not premonition, but God was guiding me to things that were already being happening, which I didn't even know about at an individual level. And that has been a humbling realization. And it's clear that really, when God calls us, He will equip us and He may direct us to
Yes.
places that we may never even understand.
Yeah.
And that is what I've come to learn.
Yeah. So my second question as it relates to that part of your journey is the radio program. Do you remember that first, conversation or just I would imagine you must have been nervous to tell the nation about the issue, or were you comfortable speaking publicly about the HIV status at that point, or was it a troubling time to be on that national platform in the radio show?
Okay, so the first show was not necessarily the nation, but maybe it
Okay,
was a quarter of the nation. It was
sure,
still very public,
sure,
because the frequency could only go so far. So
sure.
this frequency was for the Copper Belt and some of the neighboring countries, actually,
Yeah,
like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was Zaire at that time. Interestingly, I used to have that cassette. There were cassettes,
hmm.
but I don't have it anymore. I don't know where it got lost at. But I was very unique in a way, and this is why I attribute it to that God wanted me to do this. because instead of feeling nervous, instead of feeling for myself or feeling embarrassed, as a lot of people thought, I really felt I am doing what I'm called to do. And it almost felt like that expression, feeling I had when I left the hospital was now being fulfilled, that this is my destiny. So for me, it felt like if I ever did just one radio station,
Yeah.
that was it. So I was fast. Some things I think I were not even as clear because I wanted to say everything. I wanted to touch everyone. I
Yeah.
wanted to encourage anyone because I didn't know if I'll ever speak again. I didn't know if I'll ever have another chance again. And people were calling in because it was a live show by a late Dr. Manasseh Piri. May his soul rest in peace. He just died out of prostate cancer. But he was also encouraged because he had been an advocate on HIV, but being a medical doctor, being someone who was of the elite, for lack of a better class,
Yeah.
the classism, he really thought he needed someone who was living with it.
Yeah.
And not many people are not willing. So when he found me, he also felt I was God sent. I
Uh-huh.
also felt he was God sent because prior to that, I always wanted to become a broadcaster.
Uh-huh.
And so being on radio had a lot of meaning for me. It was
Uh-huh.
this childhood dream of becoming a broadcaster, becoming to reality. It was this vision I had, I felt, of speaking to the world about HIV. I would even say I've got a vision for the world. That's
Wow.
how I would say it. Was coming to fulfillment, even if it meant I just spoke for that one particular show.
Sure.
I would have died a happy person.
So would you say, I mean, it seems like almost God brought you the the Barnabas, if you were Paul, or Timothy, if you were if he was Paul, or some combination of God putting people together of like-minded, like-hearted people who had the calling on their life to speak into the issue of the time. Um, wow. God opened that door. And so, and then obviously at some point, he affirmed for you, or the community affirmed for you, that you were good at it, that you were good
Yeah.
on the radio, and that this was a timely topic. How did that come about? Did you immediately know I did a great job? Or did you have concerns that maybe it wasn't good? Or how did that affirmation of your work come together?
So there were a lot of things that were happening in the background. One of the moments was one man in a town called Chililabombwe. This was even before the radio station. In 1996, he called me. It was a prayer meeting, and a lot of churches were concerned about this man because he was calling himself a prophet, and people were concerned. But he told me, I have a vision for you. I didn't even understand what the vision meant. He said, I see a calling on your life, and God will use you,
Wow.
and you're going to travel so many places. Now, he was talking to someone who never even had a passport at that time. And he said, I see so many flags flagging, but three flags are more prominent: the American flag, the Canadian flag, and the Australian flag. And he said, the American flag comes to a standstill. Well,
Wow.
when I look back to the meeting I was invited to in 2000, it was at 2003, to meet with George Bush. To me, that became very fulfilling of what that man had said, because a flag means authority, a
Yes.
flag means power. And when I met up with George Bush, not only did he commit, President George Bush, 15 billion US dollars to HIV and AIDS in Africa and in some of the Asian countries, he really became a beacon of hope in the time of HIV, especially in Africa. And I think that is a legacy that no one will ever take away from him. I remember being in Amsterdam, was it 2 years ago, where President Clinton spoke to how, though they are in different parties, he revered President George W. The son, President George Bush, of his leadership at a time that it was so crucial. And that was the time of HIV and AIDS. And that is the
Wow.
time I was invited in to
Yeah.
speak to the White House, to power, to the Americans. Because when President George Bush gave, he didn't give his personal money. He gave the money from all of you who are taxpayers, from
Mhm.
people who whether supported people with HIV or not. And that has saved millions of lives. So
Yes.
there was that prophet. Then as I grew in my faith, there were people who kept saying words which were similar. You have a calling on your life. And I didn't understand. And then other people just said you're a good public speaker. So a combination of all that, plus different people that God brought along the way. I've talked of the Dr. Manasseh Piri. There
Yeah.
was a man by the name of Fodson Kafreku from World Vision Zambia. There was a man by the name of Ken Casey, who was a vice president for World Vision International,
Yeah.
came to Zambia and committed to sponsor my kind of yeah, I don't know if it even qualifies as a salary, but something, some kind of
Stipend.
stipend so that World Vision could now begin to think of how can they maybe work with me or how can I work for them with all the legalities of legal and I didn't have any qualifications. So how do we explain this? Then there was a pipeline trip. There was a trip in the pipeline in New York where they justified my coming to speak. And when I spoke there, then they came people like African American doctor and a bishop
Yeah.
who really said, World Vision, if you cannot buy treatment for this woman, then you're not going to get the African Americans to support you. Yes,
Hmm.
you may not help everyone, but she
Hmm.
is one person that God is going to use mightily, and
Yeah.
you need to do something about it. And out of there was a man now who's the president of Living Water,
Sure.
Mike Montel,
Yeah.
who committed to making that happen, came to Chicago. I began to speak for World Vision. And through that, I met you
Yeah.
Jason Miles in Seattle, where I ended up working. So I think when God calls you, as a lot of people say, He sends the resource, and not
Hmm.
only human resource, but also in terms of what is needed. And that is always a satisfying feeling to know. Not that it's going to be easy. I think you're not promised easiness, but
Yeah.
I see it even being a member of parliament. I came in at the last minute. I didn't have any money. I wasn't a politician in 2016, but people said, because of your heart, because of your commitment to justice for the poor, to being a voice, we want you to run as a member of parliament, which is a closer equivalent to a senator. And I have never been, no one in my family had ever been. And yet, every step of the way, God continued to open doors. So even as I am rerunning again, I believe that God keeps showing me the same identical ways that He has always worked. And I think the Bible speaks to many of these stories for the different characters that we learn about. So it's been a God journey. And not that it has been an easy one, but
Mm.
it has also been a very, uh, it ministers to me. Like sometimes I get goosebumps, you know, thinking about just how
Yeah.
the journey has been.
Yeah.
And if you know my story in detail, I come from a very poor background after both of my parents died of AIDS.
Yeah.
So you can imagine losing your parents due to AIDS yourself, then becoming a child-headed household, meaning you are the one to take care of your family. I was taking care of 8 other people with barely nothing, as you say in America, dead poor. And then to find myself in all these different spheres, to speak to presidents, to then become a member of parliament, and to help others, which I try to do to the best of my ability because I think of them. You know, when I see my people in my constituency,
Sure.
in their schools, they still sit on dirt floors. So if I can find a way of donating desks, even beyond my work, or partnering with other organizations, it makes me glad, and I know that I have been fortunate in this life,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it overtakes the hardship that I've gone through,
Yeah.
and it makes me see the silver lining in every dark cloud.
Yeah. Well, I will never forget the first time I heard you speak. And just a little backstory on that from my side. Um, I was working in the San Francisco Bay Area for World Vision with churches, and Menlo Park Presbyterian Church uh, had a member of their church who they had something they called Compassion Sunday. And someone named Todd stood up in the pre-planning meeting, as good Presbyterians do. They had it very thoroughly planned, and he said, if we don't have an emphasis on HIV/AIDS for this Compassion Sunday activities, we are not doing the will of God in the moment. It's just, it has to be on the agenda, or something to that effect. And the church leader said back to him, okay, Todd, how do you want to mobilize 1,000 people to serve in support of HIV/AIDS? And he said, I'll get back to you on that. So then he called, and we began having a conversation. And what we learned about was the fact that in Zambia and many other countries, uh, community caregiver coalitions had been organized, people who would go from house to house. And it was really hospice care. They would care for the dying. They would care for the people who were just on, their final, I guess in the States, you'd call it hospice care.
Mhm.
And but they would track people's HIV status once it was known. And these caregivers, many of them became HIV positive themselves from caring for people. They didn't have anything. They didn't have supplies. They didn't have latex gloves. They didn't have anything to do the work of serving people with AIDS. And and when we learned about that, and there were 77,000 of them at the time, and this was in the early 2000s, um, we said, how could we equip them and help them? So we did a caregiver kit that we put together, and we had this program in mind that we would put together like 7,000 of these caregiver kits with 1,000 people. And it all started to come together. And my role was to bring the information and the educational component. And I was like, I don't know anything about
Mm.
this issue at all. I've never met a caregiver. I've never seen any of the work. I've just heard of it. And then Mike Mantell, your good friend and my friend, said, Princess is your speaker for this. If you can have Princess come, she will she will explain it all, and she
Mm.
will get people's hearts and minds engaged in the issue and speak authoritatively. And so of course we had you come, and the folks at Menlo Park Presbyterian were so moved. And
Mm.
they then went on to do, I think it might be close to 30 or 40,000 of
Yeah,
those
caregiver.
kits themselves. And it was an honor to be able to be a part of that program launching with you. And it was just a wonderful weekend. And I'll never forget the impact on the San Francisco Bay Area of understanding this African context for HIV/AIDS, which is really a cross-cultural sort of realization for all of them. And it changed the trajectory of, I think it's fair to say, it changed the trajectory of the Christian church in the US
Absolutely.
responding to HIV/AIDS with a compassion and a care and
Yes.
understanding of the context in which the medical crisis had developed. And you were central to that that advocacy work and really helping people understand the appropriate response to the issue. And it's an honor. It's just an honor to be able to have partnered with you. And fast forward now 20 years later, it's an honor to be able to work with you.
20 years later.
And we've had a wonderful time. And for those in the community who are watching this, So Powerful Purses have gone to Kimbe constituency and have been, given to girls in your schools, in your constituency. Let me ask a few more questions before our time runs out today. Um, a couple questions come to my mind. Are there any examples or other people's stories that you've heard that you can think of or reflect on where they've used their advocacy skills or vocational skills to make a difference? You mentioned Fordson or Manasi Piri. Are, are there others that inspired you to use your vocational gifts of speaking and communicating, and that they did it differently or in a different context? Any reflections on that regard?
Well, there are many now. At my time, there weren't many.
Hmm.
There was a man by the name of Winston Zulu, actually,
Hmm.
that I would come to learn about later, though we carry the Zulu name similarly, but we are not related because the Zulu I carry was from my late husband. He had been a man who talked about his own previous life and how he got infected. He became very well known. There came other people, um, but we were all in different places, different towns. So
Yeah.
there wasn't much of communication. Later on, I would learn of Florence Mumba, actually. I think her, even the AIDS had affected her leg and she would be limping in Kitwe. But she was working with the organization that I started to volunteer for before World Vision, called CHEP. It was called Copper Belt Health Education Project, CHEP in short. And she was very committed, very passionate with the peer education. And it
Hmm.
is there that I would take flyers and would study them and then talk about assertiveness, about peer pressure, about the importance of community engagement. And so there were a few people. But for me, really, though I was young, there are few people in the past who stood up for me. One of those was David Livingstone. For some reason, I grew up in Livingstone when we were younger, and going into the museum all the
Hmm.
time, though far from HIV, but I just felt like he had a compassion for the people. Yes, there are different stories of David Livingstone, but I think for me, he stood out as someone who really tried to see humans for what they were, regardless of their race. And I think, young as I was, there is something that touched me in learning about David Livingstone. And there is a museum in Livingstone,
Yeah.
and how he discovered the falls. Not that he discovered it really, because the locals knew about it,
Sure.
but just how he brought it to the market, but also how he worked with the local people. And so you find that even when he dies in Zambia, his body is in Chitambo, and then they took his heart and have gone there. And then you add the stories of people like Mahatma Gandhi. Again, that is another person whom I don't even remember exactly how I came to learn about Mahatma Gandhi. But his all ethos on simplicity and humanity, I don't even know how it touched my mind, but somehow he became one of those people that I never met, of course, but just loved the way he could give up almost what he had
Yeah.
and started to really fight for his people.
Yeah.
So there are all these writings of these people. And then, of course, later on, I would learn about Nelson Mandela's plight and what he did. So he added on to my collection of people I looked up to. And then lately, about 20 years ago, I come to America. I didn't know about Martin Luther King. I
Hmm.
come to America. I learn about Martin Luther King. I learn about Harriet Tubman. I learn about
Hmm.
Lincoln,
Hmm.
President Lincoln. So I really feel Mother Teresa is another addition. And then
Yeah.
Oprah, as different as she may be from the people I've mentioned, but I appreciated the fact that she was able to overcome her own abuse as a child
Hmm.
and to begin to do greater good, even though she's a powerful businesswoman. But and broadcasting, I guess, I could relate to that. So I think it's finding all these people and realizing they're ordinary people who just chose to do something.
Yeah.
And in daily people, one of those people was Rich Stens, like his name, who was the president for Vision. Very stunning looking if you look at him.
Hmm.
But as I got closer to him, especially one time we were speaking at a church conference in New Zealand. So myself, him, and his wife had to travel together. And I saw a different side of Rich Stens that I didn't see much because to me, he came out as a Sten person, like his name. And even though I traveled with him a lot of times in the US. So it clearly shows you that in all societies, there are good people. In all societies, there are
Sure.
people who are willing to go out of their way to help others. And that is what I try to find, and always asking the question, what will be my legacy? Because whether we like it or not, and I think COVID-19 has come to remind us that some people may not die of AIDS, but like America, you have lost a lot of lives due to
Yeah.
COVID-19, more than Zambia has lost. Ironically speaking, really, because we are not doing anything different, but you have had more deaths, due to COVID, and the struggle has been real. And when I came to America, the September 11 attack had just happened.
Hmm.
So here once again, as human beings, we meet at the core of this realization that we are once born and one day will die. So the question to each one of us, how will we choose to use our vacation?
Yeah.
How do we choose to use the gift and the calling, the talents and the resources that God has given us, not only for our families and those we love and those who are closer to us, but how powerful it is when we can touch someone who
Yeah.
maybe will never hear their thank you, who will never pay us back. I think for me, that is the power of giving. That is the power of the ripple effect, as it has come to be known. And it is the power of humanity. As in Africa, they would call it, it is the power of Ubuntu, where you realize we are all only in this world for a short period of time. Whether you live
Hmm.
100 years,
Yeah.
it is a short period of time. And like I've said in my book, will you rather live many years and yet not well spent? Or would you rather live few years and yet well spent? And the
Sure.
decision is to each one of us.
Yeah. Well, so beautifully said. Let me just ask one final question, if it's okay, and have us speak about one final segment. And that's really to address the issues of today in Zambia. As you know, the So Powerful Purse program is the goal is 24,000 beneficiaries this year. And I think at this point, we have 73 team members on stipend there now, and growing. And obviously, the issue of girl child education and access to feminine hygiene supplies has become top of mind for many, many people. And working together to see girls excel in school and have a good access to education is one part of a ability to overcome extreme poverty and to make a difference in the lives of individuals and communities. What are your thoughts on the current issues in Zambia? Western Frontier is known as one of the poorest areas, but there's poverty throughout. Um, Share a little bit about what our community can understand and the way in which the PURSE program makes a difference in the lives of girls and what you see on the ground there in your constituency and beyond.
Well, first of all, let me say I am grateful to the board members of So Powerful and the Pest Initiative, the volunteers, you, the founders, and really the work that is being done by people like Esther in Mumbai and now expanding to Central Province, which is the province is a state. So it's
Sure.
the state in Central Province where Kembe is, and then West Province, one of the poorest provinces in Zambia. What I would say is that even in Parliament, there was even a bill that was passed to ensure that it quickens the government to have more like a fund to give reusable pads. And it was being proposed by one of my colleagues, member of parliament for Chembe. I'm for Kembe, he's for Chembe, Sebastian Lande. But yet we didn't see much of the implementation.
Hmm.
Unfortunate with our government, sometimes the resources are either not enough and sometimes are used in other areas that may be seen to be more pressing. And yet we know that when girls are not well equipped in terms of their monthly experience of having sanitary pads, it affects them.
Yeah.
And now, not only governments, but also world organizations such as the UNICEF and UNFP, they're beginning to realize that advocating and providing sanitary hygiene pads for girls in Africa is really an entry point to ensuring that we tackle the illiteracy levels,
Hmm.
which are very high in our areas, and Kembe being one of them,
Hmm.
which is a constituency in a rural area, one of the largest constituencies in Zambia, and yet very poor in terms of the wealth, rich in spirit, of course, because I think poverty should be defined in different ways.
Sure.
Um, and we know very well that when we touch the heart of the girl child, we'll be touching the heart of the community.
Hmm.
And when the girl child is educated, there are many beneficiaries. And
Hmm.
so what PALF is doing and the PES reusable pads mission is really beyond just hygiene for a girl. I think we will begin to see, maybe not quantified yet, but I want to suggest that some of the progress we may see in ensuring that our girls stay in school, that one day they can run for being members of parliament, one day they can be the doctors, they can be the nurses, will
Yeah.
be so, if not, maybe not as direct as we'd want it to be, but indirect related. I've heard of stories where young girls stopped going to school because they were bullied upon the experience which they had where the boys discovered that she was having her periods and she didn't dress properly. And so she was bullied and she stopped school and ended up in an early marriage situation.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, we had a workshop on this very subject where members of parliament are now struggling on how can we find partners, how can we find supporting ways, how can we as local people go back to some of our traditional ways, because we
Hmm.
did have a traditional way of making sanitary pads, not as
Hmm.
hygienic as it should be, but there are all these issues because I didn't have pads when I was growing.
Hmm.
It's now I can afford to buy some sanitary pads, but we used to use a cloth. So that's kind of the concept
Yeah.
that Stopaf is using.
Yeah.
But then you have to put it on the outside and dry it. But to have people who care for the well-being of others to be able to put all the intention to empower women who are sewing those with a
Yeah.
stipend, it makes a big difference. And to make sure that the children who are receiving those are living with dignity, they can go to school with dignity. Some are even using the pesos. Because
Hmm.
I remember the last time we were
Yes.
given some, the women who came, the mothers were like, what about us? So we come to them and
Yeah.
I've seen some of them at the market, like put their money as they are selling, and I
Yeah.
just laugh. And so
Yeah.
it is a recommendable initiative, and we hope that as it will continue to expand in Zambia, it will expand in other parts of Africa.
Amen.
Uh, I believe that in this life, we are all given different strengths. I've lived in America enough to know that there are also problems which may not be here.
Yeah.
And so also how can maybe people from Africa share and encourage our brothers and sisters in America, but
Yeah.
also vice versa. There are things that, basic as they may be, cleaning hands, it's until we have boreholes,
Hmm.
until we have schools, which for people in America, you can't even fathom,
Yeah.
to say, how can you live without running water? But this is happening in our countries. And
Yeah.
so how can a girl go to school if we're going to encourage them to be educated without even sanitary pads? And this is where so powerful
Mm.
here in Zambia, and we are grateful.
Amen. Well, I just have one final quick question, and I'm only doing
You're
this because I.
acting like a politician now. I thought I heard you say final.
Well, I know my audience really well, and I know that if I don't have you just mention your beautiful outfit
Yeah.
and your headpiece and your garments, I know that they want to know. Just mention, like, well, just describe your your outfit. I know you're going to a special event tonight. You're being honored this evening. So just tell us a little bit about what you're wearing on the red carpet, if you will, for a moment.
Yeah, and I hope completely overdressed for the audience. But I am wearing a Chittenga suit, as we
Okay.
call it.
Okay.
I remember one time being in America, they were like, "Oh, your garb looks nice." I'm like, "The garb?" And then the other person said that your costume looks. I'm like,
Costume. No.
so for us, this is the usually more formal way of dressing up.
Okay.
Today's outfit actually is more West Africa than it
Okay.
is, but it's all Africa because we interchange.
Sure.
And West Africans even have more of the regal look. And I'm being a guest of honor today, so I had to really look regal. So this from in Zambia, we'll have the similar head wrap, but it'll be very more subtle, very more modest. But this one is really like off the chart. So it's still the same name. It's Chitambala. When we wear the head wrap, it's the
Okay.
Chitambala. Some may call it a duku, especially when they are so fluffy like that, very
Okay.
West African. Then, of course, it's just a top that is made with it. Like, it's just a top plus a skate. And
Mhm.
today's young people, which I'm still part of trying to hold on, um, we try to then make them more modern,
Mm,
more maybe fitting a runway catalog, and yet you still use the same fabric. So
sure.
even younger people are using maybe some of the designs you may find in Macy's, or I
Mhm.
don't know, the other shops they wear, but then they would use the fabric. So it's beautiful also to see that even people in the West, in the Western world, are wearing Chitenge fabrics,
Mhm.
but maybe this more shiny, but more subtle. They're using them for canvas, or they're using PSAs. So it's nice to see that the world is beginning to actually realize that we are a global village and we
Sure.
can use a little bit of everything. But I always
Yeah.
love my outfits. Like, I always try to wear them. It's one way of holding on to my culture, to just saying Africa is here, and there is so much good also coming out of Africa. And
Yes.
I believe God is teaching all of us that we have something to offer for for each other.
Yeah.
And for me who has been privileged to live in both worlds, I see the beauty and I see the darkness in all
Mhm.
worlds. And
Mhm.
God wants each one of us to find that light within us and to make it shine brighter for a better world to live in.
Amen. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It's an honor, and it's an honor to partner with you actively in the purse programming in Kimbe
Mm.
constituency, and may that continue and may it grow. And thank you again.
Thank you so very much.